My next guest, Maine Senator Angus King, an independent, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. We want to ask you about the whole Russia connection, but first, I don't know if you have an immediate take on this health care bill, on whether eliminating anything but a catastrophic policy for a lot of people would actually pass muster with any Democrats or moderate Republicans.
Well, the first thing, Andrea, is this is an absolutely preposterous process. I mean, a bill drafted in secret by we literally don't know who. We're going to see it maybe this afternoon. They're talking about a vote on Tuesday. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to be making laws that are affecting 1/6 of the U.S. economy and tens and maybe perhaps 100 million people that nobody knows what's in it. Take, for example, the insurance provision that you just mentioned. My first read, and in hearing from insurance people, is that would essentially destroy the individual market, because only younger and healthier people would buy these bare bones policies. It would take them out of the risk pool. That would leave older and sicker people in the individual market. That would drive the costs up, which would drive more people out, which would drive the costs up further. It's a death spiral. And that's the kind of thing we ought to have hearings on. We ought to have people in from the insurance industry, people from the medical industry, people from hospitals across the country, and understand what this will do before people vote on it. If I were on the other side, I wouldn't vote on it until I got more information from the people that will be affected by it. Otherwise, you're asking your people to jump off a cliff and not know what's at the bottom.
And it seems that they, well, we'll have to see whether they're really willing to go ahead and do that. Now, Senator, you're on the Intelligence Committee. We now hear that the Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley and Feinstein has suggested this as well, are not going to only ask for Manafort, but are going to ask for testimony from Don Jr. Do you think the Intelligence Committee needs to also hear from Don Jr. about this extraordinary email chain with the Russians and the meeting that was held back in June?
Absolutely. I think it's a critical part of this discussion. I mean, the piece of did the Russians do something to interfere with our elections is very well established. There's no doubt that they did, that they were trying to assist the Trump campaign. The missing piece was, were there connections between the Russians and the Trump campaign? And frankly, that's what a lot of the investigation has been focusing upon. But now we have this email that pretty much says, yeah, we're gonna work together from the Russian government. We have information on Hillary. His response is, I love it. Maybe it'll help us later in the summer, which would be later in the campaign. So that opens up a whole host of questions. What happened in that meeting? But more importantly, what about future meetings and future relationships and future connections? And we don't know that yet. Is this an isolated incident, or is it the tip of an information iceberg that is going to have a substantial effect on the course of our investigation? But the short answer is yes, he has to come. Well, I believe, I'm not speaking for the committee, but I believe that the committee has to talk to him, not only about the emails, but what really happened in that meeting.
Now, there's also a reporting from McClatchy, which has not been confirmed or established yet, as far as I know, by the committees or the investigators, looking at the possible connections between the data mining operation that Jared was nominally in charge of during the campaign, the data that worked so well in terms of the bots and the other online attacks against Hillary Clinton, and whether they were in any way using the WikiLeaks emails, whether there was any connection between the Russians, WikiLeaks, those cutouts, and the campaign itself. Do you have any evidence so far that there is that connection?
Andrea, you know I'm not going to answer that question. As a member of the committee, I can't tell you what evidence we do or don't have. I can tell you that is an area of inquiry, and it's an area of whether there was coordination.
How important an area of inquiry is there in terms of this social media aspects?
I think it's important because we've now learned that the Republican or the Trump campaign use of social media, particularly in the last month of the campaign, was extremely effective. And the question is, who was doing the implementing? How did it work? We don't know that. And it's certainly a question that I believe bears examination.
Now, this meeting was another one of the meetings that was not originally put on his disclosure, on his reporting forms by Jared Kushner when he was getting his security clearance. From lawyers close to this, I understand that the President of the United States has sole authority over who does or does not get security clearances at that level. So even though there have been, for months now, letters from Elijah Cummings and others on the House side, and perhaps some of you as well, as to Jared's security clearance, given all of these subsequent disclosures, the Russian banker, the president really has sole authority over whether Jared Kushner continues at this level to be operating on foreign policy.
My understanding is that that's the case, that the president has that authority, just like the president can declassify information upon his or her own authority. So ultimately, I guess that decision is going to rest in the White House, but the question is whether the information that keeps coming out bit by bit is going to undermine the president's desire to maintain that relationship. Remember, the president was very close to Michael Flynn, but when it became apparent that, number one, Michael Flynn had not been forthcoming about his relationship with the Russians, what had been discussed, and had misled other members of the administration, particularly the vice president, the president fired him. Now, it's somewhat harder to fire your son-in-law, I suppose, but I believe if the information compels it, the president's going to have very little choice.
Well, Senator Blumenthal, apparently from Connecticut, has just said to some of our colleagues that Jared should be fired. Do you think that well, what would you say to that? Because he is a member of the family and he has a unique role in the White House.
I'm not going to say whether he should be fired or prosecuted. I believe that's the prosecution side rests with Robert Mueller. The firing side rests with the president. But the president's going to have to take a hard look at the evidence, and he's going to have to ask if he himself has been misled in this process. And if he has been, then he's going to have a tough decision to make.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Thanks for being with us today.